Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host of Fiberchats. My guest today is the owner of Twice Sheared Ship, Dawn Prickett. Welcome to my channel, Dawn.
Hi, Arena. It's so nice to meet you.
I know we almost did that at H&H. We almost crossed paths, but not quite. So I'm glad to have you on my channel and we finally get a chance to talk about your products.
Yeah, I think we just got to sit next to each other very briefly while we were watching
Presentation of
a panel or a presentation or something, and so just little whispered chats next to each other briefly.
right. Well, tell me, like, what I loved about your email to me, it was like my story, the story of the company is probably your story. Well, tell me your story.
So I think that because I come to this as a hand maker, which I think most people in the fiber space do, they come to it starting out as a hand maker, that I think we have very similar stories, that things tend to be a rabbit hole. That you start out and maybe you started with crochet, maybe you started with knitting. I learned to crochet when I was like 12 or something, and my very first project was a pair of slippers, and not like the sock type slippers that you're thinking. Like it had a sole and a top and you had to sew it all together. That and once you start one craft, it tends to lead to everything. And so I learned to knit as a young adult straight out of high school. I had already known how to crochet, but I always wanted to knit because it was something that I like the way that knitted sweaters look.
Right.
And I wanted to learn to knit socks. And because those are two things that I didn't like quite how they looked in crochet, but I love how many other things look in crochet. And so I had learned to knit, but then life got in the way and I put it away until several years later. I was a new mom. I had two tiny children and I was at home all the time because I had two tiny children. And, just poor church mouse, my husband was, we were in our 20s. And so we had no money. We had no money for yarn. And I saw a tutorial on a blog on the internet, because this is pre-YouTube,
Right.
believe it or not. I saw a tutorial on how you can buy sweaters at the thrift store and unravel them for the yarn, because somebody had gifted me a skein of hand dyed wool yarn for the first time, that I'd only ever used acrylic yarn from Michaels or for Hobby Lobby or something like that. And everything in my head always said that wool was itchy, because my only experience with it was those really awful sweaters that your grandma used to, that from the 70s or whatever, that were just so itchy. And so I'm like, wool is itchy. And I had said this on, before Ravelry, there were Yahoo groups. And I mentioned that in a thread or in an email group then. And the new owner, the owner of Socks That Rock, was one of the very first hand dyed companies. And they were trying to convince people that this was a thing. I think maybe Koigu was doing it before that. And they said, you know what, you don't know what you're talking about. And they sent me a skein of their yarn totally free of charge, and just the most generous thing that anybody has really ever done. And the first time that I held that skein of yarn, it was the softest, most beautiful thing that I had ever held. And it sounds really cliche to say that a skein of yarn changed my life, but it really, really did, because that was the moment when I decided that I didn't want to knit with acrylic yarn anymore. I didn't want to knit with what I could find at Michael's or at Hobby Lobby. And we didn't have all of the options that we do now, the incredible hand dyers and the incredible artists that we have in the space now. And of course, I didn't have any money. I had two tiny little children. And so I followed that tutorial on how to unravel thrift store sweaters for yarn, because I found sweaters that had wool yarn, or I found one that had like a silk rayon blend. Don't unravel those sweaters, just so you know. And I followed the tutorial, and the first sweater that I unraveled was it was the most obnoxious thing that I had ever done in my life. I'm like, why would I do this? It took forever and I didn't have the right tools. And so I was winding the yarn around a baby gate set at 36 inches. So that's, or maybe it wasn't, yeah, it was set at 36 inches. So one loop around was 2 yards. And my shoulder hurt the next day and it was awful. I didn't know that you needed to wring all the water out of it when you washed yarn. And so I hung it on a hanger in my bathroom and it just dripped on the floor for days. and and I swore I would never do it again. But about a week later, I was looking and I had more sweaters that I had bought and I said, maybe I'll try that again. And then after I'd unraveled several sweaters, I had more yarn that I could personally knit. And I saw that people were selling the yarn on eBay, just straight from the sweaters. And I always washed mine first, or whatever. But, and I thought, well, heck, I could do that. And so I listed one lot of sweaters worth of yarn on eBay. And I thought, if it sells, it sells. And maybe I'll get some money to buy milk or, wouldn't that be nice? And it sold. And that's how my business started, was that I received a yarn of hand-dyed yarn that was so gorgeous. And I wanted to knit with only wool after that, or nice fibers. I have expensive taste and a tiny little budget. And so that's how it all started. And of course, once you pick up one thing, that first year that I really got back into knitting and was knitting, I knit socks, I knit cables for the first time, I knit lace for the first time, I knit cable color work for the first time. I tried the whole gambit. And then my mom has always been a little bit of a hippie. She did grow up in the 70s, so totally, a hippie. And she had a spinning wheel. And so I plied some of that recycled yarn on the spinning wheel. And then I got myself some fluffy fiber and I learned to spin. And then you fall down the rabbit hole and I got and I got myself a little loom. And I realized, I'm like, I've got all of these pretty yarns and all of these pretty things. And I saw people making beautiful little stitch markers and I'm like, well, I can do that. That's just wire and beads, right? And so then I started making stitch markers, and then it was more than eBay could handle, and Ravelry arrived, or not Ravelry, but Etsy arrived, and Etsy was a thing. And so we moved to Etsy and the stitch markers started selling more than the yarn did, which I wasn't terribly upset about because recycling yarn is a really tedious, tiring process. Right. And I have unraveled thousands of sweaters. And then I learned how to build a website, and I built our own website. And I think that I've dabbled in everything in the fiber space. And it's funny how the fiber space then led me to beading type stuff, that led me to jewelry making type stuff, that led me to stitch markers and all the things that we sell now. That it's all and I'm pretty sure that that's the case for most people.
I mean, I feel like it is, because I remember me starting first with knitting and I didn't even know anything about hand-dyed yarn or expensive needles. So I went to two most logical places. One was Amazon and the second one was Michael's. And I bought acrylic yarn and I bought a cheapest stack of needles, which I still have somewhere as a reminder of what not to buy. And I feel like my whole journey through this with yarn purchases and needle purchases and whatever tools I've met through my life, I keep those that were complete failure as a reminder to myself of what not to do and how that was the most expensive purchase I've done because I'm not using it.
Yeah, I never even thought about that it is the most that yarn that you bought that was cheap ends up being so much more expensive because you're not using it.
Right. And the same comes with the stitch markers that you won't use or the needles that you're not going to use. You're thinking you're saving money, but in the end, you're still forced to buy better equipment just because you understand how much easier it is on your body, on your hands, and how like what difference it makes. So it's like I feel like those are the expensive mistakes along the way, you know.
Well, and I feel like sometimes when we're starting out, I mean, we all start out at the beginning. We do. Everybody starts out at the beginning, and you don't know what you don't know. And everybody's preferences are different. And that and so you have to try things to know what you're gonna like.
Right.
But the reality is that I realize that the amount of time that we have available to knit is kind of finite. Whether, you know, because we have a job and we have kids and we have all these other things that are pulling at our time, and that it's so much more enjoyable. There are so many things about knitting that can be frustrating, or that about life that can be frustrating, that you don't need to make it worse
Right.
by knitting with needles that are going to come apart or that catch your yarn. You don't need to make it worse by making do with loops of yarn for stitch markers if you don't have to, because I've realized one of the reasons why what I do is I design tools that are designed to save you brain power so that you get to knit more and you end up spending less time recounting and frogging your work, because
Well, I was introduced by mistake actually before I even met you at H&H to the row counter. I saw it in my local yarn store, and the owner just gifted it to me. Like I didn't know what I was getting into. It just looked cute, and I was like, okay, thank you. I came home and I was knitting my first sweater. And I was, so there was like the decreases were every 6 rows, but they were like 10 or 15 decreases. And so I used this row counter not to count rows, but to count decreases, because like I could figure like where the decreases and count 6 rows, but like the amount of decreases that was taking forever to keep in mind or write down. So I was using it for that. So it's like an unexpected use of the tool that was basically, you know, designed for something else.
Well, that's brilliant.
do
And
you, do you hear the stories like this, that like your tools that you designed with certain thing in mind, right, being used differently, and people find like different new uses for your things?
well, and I love that, because in the same way that some of us prefer wooden needles and some of us prefer metal needles and some of us, you know, like this yarn or that yarn, or all of these things, that all of our brains work a little bit differently. And so sometimes it's kind of frustrating to me when people tell me, well, how do you use the thing? And I'll say, this is how I use the thing. But we're naturally creative people, and we'll come up with all sorts of ways to be able to use the same thing, to be able to do a wide variety of things that work with our brain and make it easier for us. So what may make it easier for me and the way that my brain works may not be easier for you. You may say, that's way too tedious, I'm going to do it this way. And I say, yes, do it that way.
I've heard that you used to have a couple alpacas at home.
I did.
How did that? And I'm like, I love that story, because it's like, well, I started knitting and then I got alpacas because I went into the rabbit hole. And tell me a little bit more about
it. It was totally the rabbit hole. So bless my husband, the sweet man that he is, that we actually lived right next door to my grandmother. She had a horse boarding facility, and she'd given us a couple of acres of her land to build a house on. And so we lived right next to her, and we had all of these little kids, and we didn't have any livestock or any farm animals, because my grandma has only ever been into horses. All of those other things didn't interest her. She was only into horses. But because I had fallen down so hard into the rabbit hole of all of the fiber art stuff, I was really into spinning at that point. And I'm like, wouldn't it be great to have our own fiber animals? And I don't know how I ran across it, but I saw an ad. I think it was on Craigslist or something, for somebody who was selling alpacas. And they were young male alpacas that he was not going to have for breeding stock. And they were not gelded at the time, but that I'm like, that would be perfect. I could just have a couple of fiber boys and they could live in my yard. And they did have a pen. It was not directly in my backyard, but so I asked my husband, I'm like, how much do you love me? And we didn't have a trailer. And we drove way up into the mountains in our minivan, folded down all the seats and laid down cardboard in the back and a tarp and loaded up those alpacas into the back of my minivan and brought them home. And we had them for a couple of years, but they had not been socialized when they were younger and alpacas are fairly timid creatures. They don't generally by nature enjoy being touched or handled, which is frustrating when they're so soft and fluffy and you're like, I just want to hug you. And so it was frustrating that they were not particularly tame. They did not particularly enjoy being handled or touched. But I do have a photo somewhere looking out my studio window, which was my living room, out into the backyard. And we had let the alpacas from their pen into our backyard to mow down the grass so that we didn't have to mow it. It's the funniest thing to look out my back window and to see this white head just popped up in the backyard. Eventually we decided that they were not earning their keep, that between the hay and taking care of them and the fact that they didn't want to be snuggled and that I couldn't actually sell their fleece for enough money to cover their cost and things like that, that we did sell them on. But I do still have several years worth of fleeces in my garage. We took them with us moving from Colorado to Idaho. They're still in their buckets, have not been opened or touched in the 5 years that we've lived here. But I do have their fleeces that I will do something with.
You mentioned a few children running around. We're talking 5, right?
Yes, I have 5 children.
How do you find time to run a business, to come up with new ideas, to eat, for God's sake? Where is this time coming from? Are you the most organized person on the earth?
Sometimes I think I'm probably neglectful is what it is. But no, the reality is when you have 5 children and my husband is not a lawyer or anything. He works for Costco, which is a wonderful company. We love Costco. But when I have 5 children and I had them bam, 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 right in a row, that by the time that my youngest 2 are twins, by the time that they were born, I had 5 children ages 6 and under. They were all just 2 years apart, just really, really close together. And that there's no way that I could have a job anywhere outside of the house. It was not practical.
Right.
And, but we needed something. And so this was absolutely my way of contributing to the family finances. It was also my way of staying sane because I tend to be kind of a high achiever sort of person. And that I love my children. I adore my children. They are the reason why I do everything that I do, but I was not fulfilled by vacuuming the house and baking bread and watching Blue's Clues till my eyes, And so this was a very much a creative outlet for me, even more so than knitting is. Being a business owner is a very creative outlet for me. And I used to, when my children were very small, I used to think about the things that I was selling and that how many gallons of milk that would buy. So if I sold, this many orders or this many things, that was 5 gallons of milk for our family, or whatever. And certainly we're much bigger now. My children are teenagers now. My oldest is 21 and my 2 babies, I think there's a picture somewhere on Ravelry of my 2 baby twins laying on a blanket that I had knit for them or whatever, but that they are now 15. And so things are much easier now that they're teenagers. They're a lot more self-sufficient now. My office has moved out of my front room in my house, that we have our own studio office space. I have a much better work-life balance when I don't work out of my home, because it's really easy when you work in your home to work all the time,
Right.
or to not work at all because it's always there. But really a lot of it was, you know, my kids would watch TV and I would work, or they would be at school and I would work. That and you have to temper your expectations on what you can actually do when they're small and they're so needy. It does become easier when they're in school. It does become easier when they're bigger and they're teenagers. And certainly teenagers don't need you any less than toddlers do. It's just less physically in your space all the time. That you have arms to do things now than when they're tiny. You have so many little humans touching you all the time that it's harder to physically do things, or you have to do things in small little bursts. There are times when I worked late at night or early in the morning before everybody was doing things, but you just find little snippets and spaces here and there.
What was your journey as a businesswoman? Like, was it all easy? Were there situations when you regretted not just being stay-at-home mom and not doing any of that?
I don't think that I have the temperament to have just been a stay-at-home mom. I always said when I was in college, I said I could have been a student for life. You know, I love learning things. It's one of the things, you know, which is probably one of the reasons why I enjoy being a business owner, is because you're constantly learning things. And it fascinates me. I do certainly have mom regret now that my children are teenagers, and feel like, oh, have they felt neglected? Have they felt abandoned? Have they felt like this was a problem for them? I do think that owning a business is one of the greatest personal development programs there is. Certainly being a parent is one too, because I am a totally different and much better person after having children. It forces you to think about other people in a way that you never did before. It forces you to put your own needs on hold somewhat. Being a business owner forces you to be brave in ways that you never thought that you could be brave. That I have, as a business owner, I've gone from the point where, you know, it was absolutely terrifying to reach out to a local yarn shop the very first time and proposition and say, hey, would you like to carry our little stitch markers? Aren't they so pretty? To, you know, going to H&H this year and to talking to all of the shop owners and being so very frank and saying, this is who we are and this is what we're doing. And go from the place of everything was handmade by me and my two hands to the terrifying prospect of hiring my first employee who, you know, and having all of those thoughts in my head and saying, well, who would want to work in my living room? Isn't that weird? Why would any, you know, this isn't a real job. What's, you know, do I need to make sure that, you know, everything looks professional, right? Before I can do this, and all telling that voice in my head that says that you have to be this before you can be this is telling it to be quiet, because I've learned that none of that is really true. And that all of the ceilings that I thought were there, that a handmade business can only, you know, that everybody talks about making six figures in a handmade business. And I always thought that was like the holy grail and the be all and end all of a business. And I realized that that's a glass ceiling that I put above myself, that it's not there. It doesn't exist. And realizing how many limitations we put on ourselves, with particularly in the handmaker space, particularly as women, particularly as very generous, kind individuals, feeling like if we do a certain thing, that's beyond us, or we're being somehow we're asking for too much of the world somehow.
So let
And
me ask you about that, because you started from the point of like, how many gallons of milk can I buy if I sell these stitch markers? Do you feel like because you came from that background, you underprice your items? Do you have issue with pricing your items fairly to cover your time and the time of your employees?
I think that I have definitely in the past been that way. I think that it shifted somewhat. A lot of business is really about a mental shift at different points. I try to make sure it's really easy when you come in and you are and you're a hand maker and you look at the cost of the materials and you say, well, I could make that. And then you look at the cost that somebody is charging for that and you're like, that's way more than the cost of materials. And um and to feel like somehow if you charge more than the cost of materials that you're gouging people. And that's not the case, because I've realized that not so some of the things that my brain told me over the years were that if I hired an employee, I was somehow exploiting them for their labor or whatever, which is not true. That if I charged more than the cost of materials, then I was somehow cheating the people that I'm selling to, which is not true. That when I hire the ladies who work for me, that not everybody wants to be a business owner. Not most people, we are weird. Most people don't want to be a business owner. Most people love the idea of getting a good paycheck and coming to work and then being able to go home from work and not think about it. Most people like having the dependability of that. And so the idea that if I charge, if I know that the materials cost this and the labor is going to cost this, and then I take that amount and I double it and that becomes my wholesale price, and then I double that again and that becomes the retail price. Most people look at that retail price now and they're like, I can't possibly charge that amount. That is exploitation and I'm cheating everybody. But the only way you can really stay in business is if that is your price. And then, people will say, well, then you must be paying your employees nothing. Well, no, that's not the case. I realize that if people will pay $30 for a skein of hand-dyed yarn, most people are comfortable paying a lot more than you think they are. And the reason why you think that the price should be where it's at is because that's what you're comfortable with your little church mouse budget, because that's where we're all at.
Right.
It really, really is a mental shift to recognizing the value of what it is that you're giving your customers, because you're providing something that is wonderful and that is beautiful and that is helpful to them. And you shouldn't have to feel like you're begging them to take it.
I was talking yesterday to a friend of mine, and she does a lot of sales in the farmer markets and craft markets. Mm-hmm. So that's her main way of making money. So she's trying to get the cheapest yarn, the cheapest materials, to keep the cost down, to create her whatever things she's making, to sell it so it's still reasonably priced for the audience that she has. And she was asking me yesterday, we were talking, and she said, like, I'm contemplating raising prices because it's not sustainable for me to keep these prices with the economy and like everything that's going on and the cost of living increasing so much. But I feel like I can't, because I wouldn't pay these prices for something like this. And I said, yes, but you can make it, and people who buy from you cannot, or they don't wanna, or they don't have time for it, or they have no idea how to. Right?
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for makers, I feel like, to like, they have zero problem of going to post office to work and asking them for the fair wage, right? But to ask the fair payment for the time they spend crafting is somehow very difficult.
Well, and if you look at it that way, that you have created for yourself a job that you would never accept if somebody offered it to you. I had a year where I had, probably my first successful Black Friday weekend, and I had all of these orders. I don't even remember how many I had. I had 50 orders over the weekend, and I was ecstatic because of all of these orders. But then I was making everything to order at the time that it was ordered, which meant I then had to make all 50 of those orders over the weekend. And I worked probably 80 hours or whatever trying to fulfill all of these things. And I literally ended up on the floor of my office crying because I hated my life so much. And this is supposed to be something that's joyful and not something that is, bringing you pain or whatever, that you would never accept a job who told you that you needed to work this many hours for
Right.
no pay. You never, ever would do that. And so why would you create that for yourself? You deserve more than that.
Well, let's talk about how you see your business growing from now on. Like what changed in you? How did you change during this journey?
I think um I think it's a slow, gradual change. Again, mental shifts and things like that, that I have always viewed myself as a maker, and how I've described my shop has been very different over the years. It started out of, oh, I sell this thing, is how I would say it, is I sell this thing, or I make this thing. And then it changed to, I have a shop where I sell this thing. And then it changed to, I'm the owner of a shop that sells this thing. And then it's changed to, I am the creator of a brand that sells this thing. And the words that we use matter, and it changes the way that we see things. It's shifted from very much, I am the artist and I make all of the things, to I have created a business that makes the things. It's no longer me. It's kind of a separate entity. And some of that shifted when I hired employees, who I love and are my very favorite part of the business, honestly. Is that now I was kind of the steward of all of these people that I had brought into this business. And, it was now my job, not necessarily to make the things, but my job was to protect and take care of them. And so all the things that I do in the business, the marketing and the creation of new products, is to take care of my customers so that they have beautiful, wonderful things. But it's also to take care of all of these people that are depending on me. And I feel kind of like the mom of the business and taking care of everybody. And it really does change the trajectory of how you see where you want the business to go. And it certainly shifted from the mentality of, hey, I want to be able to be able to afford the grocery budget for our family. My husband can handle the mortgage or all of these things, and I'll cover groceries. It changed from that to, I want to be able to cover the grocery budget of all of our employees, or I want to be able to afford to pay them a bonus, or I want to be, and shifting things from a place of, almost feeling like a place of scarcity for me to a place of generosity to everybody else around me, really makes a big difference in how you view the business. And I love that.
Well, you have the affiliate program, so people who advertise your products or tell about them on Instagram or social media somewhere can get commissions for selling the product, right?
Yes,
Did you
absolutely.
come up with that decision? Like, why did you decide to involve associate marketing?
So we've been doing, I have been doing Facebook advertising for a very long time, in part because that was a way that I could advertise that didn't require me to talk to people. And I was still scared of talking to people. It was something that I could do behind the scenes on the computer, and, but I realized that within the knitting space, I think we're such generous humans anyway, but there are so many people who are blogging and people who are podcasting and who have wonderful shows like yours that there aren't a lot of sponsorship opportunities. And honestly, in the knitting space, I think we're afraid to ask for that.
Right.
You know, we're afraid to ask even for yarn support for the patterns that we're designing or whatever, which is silly, by the way. But I would rather, you know, pay you an affiliate commission for you to talk about us than to pay Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. You know, I really do feel that those advertising dollars that I have available to be able to spend, I would rather bless another family with that than send it to Mark Zuckerberg. But also I realize that things feel more genuine when they're coming from somebody who also cares about the product. When you use a yarn that you really love and you talk about it just because you love it, it makes such a difference in the marketplace because everybody knows that sincerity sings true. And so when we started the affiliate program, that was kind of what we were hoping for, is that we wanted people who loved our products anyway and who were already highly skilled and talented at creating videos and all of these things. And we just wanted to be able to send our marketing dollars to them instead of to Facebook.
Right. And that makes sense because like also when people who are in the craft and they understand, they can show different perspective. It's something that you might not even think about. They can show your product used different way or your product used in different setting, right? And it just clicks with somebody else and connects and brings new audience to you.
Yeah, and that's my favorite thing. I love that.
I mean, that was part of the H&H educational program. They were talking about how businesses can benefit from working with different influencers and people in the knitting industry by just giving them the product or having this affiliate marketing program, and how like it's beneficial for both the businesses and those influencers.
I think that sometimes in our space, because we come from, I think there's a certain amount of bootstrapping that comes in being a handmade business. And I've realized in the last year or so that I very much had a mental block that told me that if I collaborated with somebody else, or if I piggybacked on their audience, that was somehow cheating. That if I didn't do it 100% myself, that was cheating. Right. And that is absolutely false, because why on earth would we not help each other? Why on earth would we not make things easier by collaborating and working together? And the more that I talk to people, the more that I realize, why was I so terrified to talk to people? Because you're lovely. This is fantastic. Why wouldn't we want to talk to each other? And so some of it was probably fear. Some of it was that crazy idea that I have to do it all myself, otherwise it doesn't count. But yeah, I would love to see more collaborations within the knitting space. I would love to see more people sharing things and not feeling so precious and so scared of somebody ripping them off that you never have the opportunity to see how generous and kind and wonderful everybody else is.
I mean, honestly, like I find it also like what interesting to me, and we sort of briefly talked about it. Katie and I, we talked about it. There is this, we all have our own audience. We think we are in the same knitting space or crafting space, and yet each one of us has our own following. And by you and me doing exact same video, like identical technique, you're going to introduce your audience to that technique, and I'm going to introduce a completely different audience to that technique. And I found it interesting because I saw a video on your Instagram where you used the cord to do the provisional cast on. Then I saw Laura Nelkin demonstrating that technique for her sweater, and people were like, oh my God, this is new discovery, right? And then I did the same exact video of me doing it because I was participating, and I am participating in Laura Nelkin's knit along for that sweater. So I showed it as like new to me technique, and everybody was like, I never seen anything like this. And I find that a lot with like my channel when I'm asking somebody who is like highly respected, well known, as I think, in the industry, and I'm inviting them to my channel, and I'm thinking, but what can I ask? Because everybody already knows this person. And then I get a comment of like, thank you for introducing me to this person. I discovered them through your channel. So it shows that there is like so much room and so much possibility of like us collaborating and us introducing our audience to each other, you know?
Yeah. Well, and the reality is your audience loves you because you are.
Well, I hope so.
Well, yeah, because you have all of your wonderful, unique qualities that make you you, and the way that you talk and the way that you introduce things. And nobody is going to be able to talk to them the same way that you do.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter if you do the exact same video, Katie. So Katie is my social media coordinator, and she's got an incredible Instagram following of her own at Knit Life Oils. But she talks about how every time she does a video of the cabled cast on, the internet goes crazy and they love it. And she's like, I swear people should have seen this by now. I've posted the same video several times. But you always have new people finding you. And you always have people who maybe didn't see that video, but saw the next one or what the algorithm fed them. And so, yeah, just because you're doing something that somebody else did, you are the only you. And nobody else is going to do it the same way.
When you started, you were unraveling those sweaters on those baby gates. It was all you doing it, and like whenever spare minute you had. And now you have these employees that you're responsible for, and you have business, and you have marketing, and you have Katie doing videos and all these things. Do you miss the simplicity of that time of unraveling the yarn by yourself and not being responsible for all of that?
There are certainly times where my anxiety starts to creep up, and I have what I call like I can't breathe day, where the weight of all of the decisions that I have to make sits really heavy on my shoulders. And those are the days where I really do just go back to the workroom and pick something that needs to be made and just make stuff. And I love the flexibility that comes from being able to have that choice upon occasion to be able to do that. For the most part, though, I do not miss the days where I was the only person making things, because one of the major downfalls of that is that if I did not make things, I did not make money. If I did not make things, then we didn't have milk. And the reality is now is, well, certainly I have to do the marketing, and I have to send emails, and I have to plan things for our surprise boxes. And if I don't do those things, then the orders don't come in. But those are not as dependent on every day having to do the same things. I can batch them in larger groupings. That more hands within the business means that I have the ability to go on vacation and still get a paycheck. It means that my employees have the ability to go on vacation and the world doesn't shut down. And so spreading out everything across a team means that I now have a life that I didn't think was possible with a handmade business. 2 years ago, my husband and I took a trip to Italy for the first time. I had never been out of the country. And I was gone for 2 weeks, and I checked emails, customer service emails, I think once a day. But other than that, I did nothing. And that was the most amazing thing that I didn't think was even possible with a handmade or a fiber business. And so I don't think that I could ever go back to just being me making everything, but there are certainly times where I need to shut off my brain and just make stuff because I can't handle the rest of it.
Can I share my like most stop in my track experience with
please do. Yes.
So I was scrolling through your Instagram, trying to prepare for the interview and just see like what else, if I missed something, if there is some product that you offer that like I didn't know about. And then I saw the advent box. I mean, that thing just like the most incredible gift idea on the planet.
Oh, thank you.
Can you
That's
tell
my
us,
baby.
can you share some secrets of what people might find in there?
So this is our advent box. It's enormous.
It's huge. That's why I'm
It
thinking,
is.
like I was looking at it and I'm thinking it's little things that this company sells. How many little things can be in there?
Yeah. So we have an amazing company that does our boxes for us. And I tell them what's going to be in the boxes generally and sizes. And they create this puzzle like thing in here. And so each year has been different, the sizes of the boxes and everything. And I like to use the Advent box as an opportunity to really let my creativity out. And I poll our audience a couple times a year and ask them what problems they're having in their knitting, what things, what frustrations are they having, and I try to come up with things that can help solve that problem. And I use the Advent box as an opportunity to introduce things, new things to the shop. So some of the things that we've introduced to the shop that people are that love so much, the sock rulers. The first
it's like it's so clever. It's like really a clever idea.
Which was in response to a customer who told me I would love a sock ruler that could fit in my bag. Because most of the sock rulers are a hard plastic and they're like this big and it won't fit in a small bag. And I thought, well, how do we do that? But the first time that we introduced that was in last year's Advent box. And so there are in the Advent box, there will be some normal things that you'll find in the shop all the time. So there will be a row counter, there'll be a set of stitch markers, there will be a ball of yarn, there will be a pattern, both knit and crochet. But there will be some things in there that we've never, ever showed anybody ever. And I'm really excited for this year's box. And Katie would kill me if I told you some of these big surprises. So I'm sorry.
I might have to ask her tomorrow and see if she's gonna crack.
That she has been laughing because she sees all the behind the scenes stuff. We've been talking about what would go in the Advent box since like February or March. And it's been harder this year because I've had 3 surprise boxes to fill as well. And so some of the things that I would have normally put in the Advent box went into those surprise boxes. And by the time that it came time to really think about what was going in the Advent box, I'm like, I'm out of ideas. I've already used all my creative juices. But we were really ambitious with this year's box. And I think people are going to be really, really excited. But she laughs because she's like, if people saw the iteration process for how to develop one of these things, they would laugh. Because I think one of the things that's going to be in the box, I've gone through 7 prototypes and tweaking it as I went along. And did this work? Did this work better? And with each prototype, I'll send a photo to Katie and I'm like, well, there's this, but it has this problem. And it didn't solve this problem, but it has this other problem. And trying to make sure that it meets all of the needs of what it's supposed to be doing so that it becomes effortless for you guys is really fun for my creative brain, but it's also really frustrating because I'm like, I don't know how to make that happen.
Is the Advent already closed? Like, can people still order it?
No. So it is, as we speak, August, the beginning of August. And we had 750 boxes available this year, which we opened up for in June. And at this point, we have just over 100 boxes left to last until they sell out. So
well, guys, you know what you have to do, right?
You have to
you can pause this video and run and buy one.
You won't be disappointed. I promise.
You'll thank me later. They'll put it
Irina
in the
will have an
description of
affiliate
the.
link. She's going to put it in the bottom of this video somewhere so that it doesn't cost you any more money to buy the advent calendar, but you can help support Irina by, she'll get a little commission on that. So we don't have to pay Mark Zuckerberg. We can send it to Irina instead.
Yeah, you can buy milk or coffee or a drink of my choice.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about the plans for next year. Like, is there a long-term plan for the company? Do you already like develop new products for next year Advent? Like, how far do you plan?
So our plans have gotten farther and farther out, mostly because of the volume that we're doing now. So 750 boxes takes some time. I admire, the knitting subscription companies that do 1,000 boxes a month. I have no idea how they do that. It just baffles my mind. But also that a lot of things we do in-house, but because they're handmade, all of our row counters are still made by a person on our team, that we can only make so many in such amount of time. Certainly the answer to that is that we hire more people to make more row counters, but that we have to plan out how many man hours it's going to take us to make all of those row counters. And then things like the physical box and things like this, or our Trinity bags that everybody loves from our spring box or whatever, our knitting bags. We can't make those in-house, and so we have a manufacturer that makes them for us, but it takes time for them to make it, and then it takes time for them to ship to us. And so we have the larger the quantity that we're doing, the farther out we have to plan. When I say that we were talking about this box almost a year in advance, that feels insane to me. I think that 2 years ago, I was planning out what was in the Advent box like in August or September, that I maybe wasn't even thinking about it until October. I'm like, nobody's thinking about Christmas until after Halloween, right?
That's so true.
It's not true in the knitting world though. But yeah, so for next year, we are going to do our surprise box club again. So we'll have 3 surprise quarterly boxes, one sent in March and in June and September. And we'll enrollment for that will open up in November or December of this year for next year's club. And I'd like to do more collaborations with more wonderful people like you. But other than that, I don't know what the plans are for the future. I'd like to be able to hire more people locally, be able to feed more families. And one of the things that I love about half of our staff are stay-at-home moms. So they don't come into the office. They come in once a week to pick up supplies and then drop off what they've made. And so in the same way that this was my stay-at-home mom job when I had 5 little kids and there's no way I could work outside the home, that I get to help support stay-at-home moms. And that makes me really happy. So I don't know what next year is. Probably this year, just bigger. We want to have a booth at H&H. We want to be able to have our pretty things in more local yarn shops because we love local yarn shops. I don't know, more of this.
I'm hoping to see you again at H&H next year and perhaps hang out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you so very much for being my guest today. And I'm going to have Katie separately on my channel. And I'll post that.
She will be amazing because she is so amazing.
We need to talk about oils and things.
Yes, you do.
Well, thanks so much, Dawn. It was lovely to get to chat with you.
It was lovely to get to chat with you too. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.